Some memories never fade, they bloom again with every spring. Welcome to Haze Hue. Stay with me as I paint and tell the story of poppies in bloom, a sunlit garden, and the quiet love that lingers long after laughter fades. There was a garden from my childhood that felt as endless as a dream. My grandmother's garden, lush and vibrant, stretched out under the sunlight, a tapestry of color woven with her gentle hands. It was a sanctuary, painted generously with flowers, poppies being the star of her show. Brilliant reds and soft pinks danced in the breeze, petals glowing translucently as the sun's golden rays touched them gently. My grandmother was the heart of this garden. She moved gracefully among the flowers, her voice humming softly or singing her favorite song, "You Are My Sunshine," in a voice that carried softly on the summer breeze. Yet what I remember most vividly was her laugh, loud, strong, and joyful, echoing warmly through the garden, startling the birds momentarily before they resumed their cheerful chatter. As a child, I was endlessly curious, my small feet constantly exploring every inch of soil and greenery. I ran through pathways lined with flowers, my fingers brushing petals and leaves. Butterflies would scatter gracefully ahead of me, delicate wings carrying them to safety. Bees buzzed industriously from bloom to bloom, their soft hum a constant comforting soundtrack to my explorations. My grandmother watched patiently as my curiosity led me into harmless mischief. Once, determined to examine a bee more closely, I reached out impulsively and picked one up. A sharp sting quickly taught me a lesson about respecting nature's boundaries. Tears welled up, my hands throbbing, yet my grandmother quickly scooped me into her comforting embrace, laughter mixing gently with soothing words. Her calm patience eased my pain as she applied a soothing salve, her reassuring voice softly reminding me that curiosity was good, but caution was wise. Despite the mishaps, grandmother's garden remained my favorite playground, a magical space filled with love, laughter, and gentle lessons. Afternoons spent there were bathed in golden sunlight, the air sweet with floral fragrance, mingling subtly with the rich scent of earth and growing things. We would often sit together beneath the shade of a large tree, sipping homemade lemonade, its tart sweetness refreshing against the warmth of the day. Here my grandmother would tell stories of her own childhood, weaving tales of adventures, friendships, and lessons learned in gardens long past. In quieter moments, we would simply listen to the symphony of nature around us. The rustling of leaves, distant bird songs, and rhythmic hum of bees at work. My grandmother taught me to identify birds by their calls and to appreciate the delicate balance of the garden's ecosystem. Each plant, insect, and creature had its place and purpose, she explained patiently, instilling in me a profound respect and love for the natural world. Time seemed to pause in the garden. Hours passed unnoticed as we tended the flowers or rested on the grass, gazing at the vast sky above, watching clouds drift lazily by. My grandmother's hands, always busy yet gentle, guided mine as we planted new seeds or carefully pruned the existing blooms. Her calm guidance and steady presence provided a sense of security and warmth that has stayed with me through all the years. Grandmother's garden was not only filled with the vibrant beauty of flowers, but also overflowing with wisdom, kindness, and unconditional love. It was a magical place where sunlight, poppies, and grandmother's joyful spirit flourished together, forever etched into my heart. Stepping from the sunlit garden into grandmother's kitchen was like entering another world, equally magical and comforting. Warmth enveloped me immediately, carried on aromas of baking bread, simmering stews, and sweet treats cooling on the countertop. The kitchen was the heartbeat of her home, full of bustling energy, humming quietly with purposeful activity. Grandmother moved effortlessly in this warm space, her movements graceful and sure. Her hands, strong yet gentle, worked dough with practiced ease, shaping it lovingly into loaves and pastries. The air filled with comforting scents, vanilla, cinnamon, fresh herbs from the garden, and the inviting aroma of freshly baked bread, rich and golden, pulled warm from the oven. She wore an apron that had seen many years of use, flour dusting its faded fabric like snowfall on a well-loved landscape. I was never far away, always eager to help, though my enthusiasm often outpaced my skill. Flour coated my small hands, dusted my nose, and spilled onto the floor, forming tiny white footprints that grandmother never minded. Her patience seemed endless as she guided me step by step, demonstrating how to measure ingredients, stirred gently, and carefully spooned batter into waiting pans. When I struggled, she would place her hands over mine, gently correcting my movements while whispering little words of encouragement. Those small moments felt enormous, like I was learning secrets passed down from generations before me. While we baked and cooked together, grandmother would share stories, each one holding a subtle lesson or an amusing anecdote from her past. She laughed heartily, her voice filling the kitchen with warmth and happiness, especially when recalling some humorous mishap or memorable family moment. Often she sang softly as we worked, her voice weaving seamlessly with the gentle sounds of bubbling pots and clinking utensils. Her favorite song was always the same, "You Are My Sunshine." She sang it like a lullaby and an anthem all at once. She had raised 4 children in that kitchen, the walls now lined with slightly worn cupboards and old recipe cards tucked between cookbooks, had once heard the chatter of her own kids as they grew up beneath her roof. She had taught them to cook, to care for each other, and to appreciate the value of a home-cooked meal. Her hands had tied shoelaces, wiped tears, packed school lunches, and stirred endless pots of soup. It had been a busy, noisy, loving household, full of scraped knees, birthday cakes, and comforting routines. And though the children had all grown up and moved away to build lives of their own, the heart of their childhood still lived in that kitchen. Photographs of her children lined the hallway near the dining room, all smiling brightly from within wooden frames. She would occasionally pause in front of them, a soft smile on her lips, her eyes glowing with memory. Though her children lived in distant suburbs or faraway towns, they would return for holidays and birthdays, often bringing their own little ones in tow. Grandmother would prepare for days in advance, her lists carefully handwritten, her pantry neatly arranged in preparation. Now grandmother looked forward to the visits of her grandchildren. It gave her immense joy to see little hands reaching for the mixing bowl, to hear laughter once again echoing off the tiled walls. I could feel how much these moments meant to her, in the way she smiled as I helped her stir batter, how she gently corrected my grip on the spoon, or wrapped her arms around me with flour-dusted fingers. She would often pause in the middle of stirring a pot to simply watch me, as though memorizing my presence, storing it away like a treasured recipe. Occasionally she would let me taste the batter, my eyes widening with delight at the sweetness that hinted of treats to come. Each taste seemed richer for being shared, each morsel infused with the warmth of her love. Her cooking was more than nourishment. It was comfort, security, and an expression of care. Mealtimes at grandmother's table were events to cherish. The kitchen, brightened by sunlight streaming through lace-curtained windows, was filled with chatter, laughter, and the gentle clinking of dishes. She served food generously, filling plates and hearts alike. Each dish told a story, each bite a memory crafted carefully and lovingly from simple, honest ingredients. Roast chicken seasoned with herbs from the garden, buttery mashed potatoes, baked apples with cinnamon. Each flavor was a hug on the tongue. After meals, I often lingered in the kitchen, reluctant to leave the comforting warmth of grandmother's presence. Together we washed dishes, the simple chore becoming another shared experience, her reassuring presence quietly comforting. Her voice, gentle yet vibrant, continued sharing snippets of wisdom or soft melodies, each moment bonding us closer. Evenings were especially magical. As the sky outside deepened into amber and rose, the kitchen remained lit with a soft golden glow. We would sit at the table with mugs of warm tea, the air filled with the faint scent of lavender from the sachets tucked in nearby drawers. Sometimes she would bring out old photo albums, and we would leaf through them together, her fingers pausing to trace faces and places from a life lived fully. There was always a story to accompany each image, told in her warm, rhythmic voice, with laughter that bubbled up from deep inside her. These hours in grandmother's kitchen were as valuable as the hours spent in the garden. Both places brimmed with warmth, love, and gentle lessons about life. Her cooking taught me not just recipes, but the importance of patience, the joy of creating with one's hands, and the comfort that comes from nurturing others. Grandmother's kitchen was, indeed, a place where love was cooked gently, served generously, and savoured deeply. And for those of us lucky enough to sit at her table, it was a place where memories were made and remembered, one lovingly prepared meal at a time. Years have passed since those sunlit days in my grandmother's home, but the memories linger with a vividness that feels like yesterday. Time moved on as it always does, and the garden that once overflowed with brilliant poppies and fluttering butterflies now rests a little quieter. Some flowers still bloom each spring, a little wild now, but beautiful in their freedom. The garden, like all things touched by time, has softened at the edges, its borders blurred by years of wind and rain. But in that softening, it has become no less magical. When I return now, I do so as an adult, with steps slower and a heart more reflective. I walk those same garden paths with reverence, brushing fingertips over leaves and petals like turning the pages of a beloved book. I still expect to hear her laugh echoing from behind the honeysuckle bush, or see her apron-clad figure wave from the kitchen window. Sometimes, in the gentle hush of afternoon, I can almost believe I do. The house remains, filled with traces of her, the creak of the floorboards, the smell of lavender in the linen closet, the neatly labelled spice jars, each one arranged just so. Her handwriting still marks the recipe cards in the drawer by the stove, and her favourite song, You Are My Sunshine, still plays gently in my mind whenever the sun filters through the lace curtains just right. That song, once simply a sweet melody, has become something far deeper, a tether to her, to my childhood, to love itself. When I visit now, I bring my own children. I watch them run where I once did, their voices ringing across the garden, their fingers trailing through tall grass and chasing butterflies. I see my young self in their every moment, feel my grandmother's presence in every corner of the yard. My children never knew her, not really, but they know the stories. I tell them as we pick strawberries from the patch that still sprouts shyly near the fence. I tell them as we knead dough together in the kitchen using her old mixing bowl, worn smooth by decades of use. There's something comforting about carrying on the rituals she once held so dear. I've kept some of her traditions alive, the way she folded linen napkins just so, the recipe for her golden apple cake, the habit of humming while chopping herbs. Sometimes I catch myself laughing loudly, without restraint, and realize just how much of her still lives in me. And in those quiet moments when the kids are off playing and the kitchen is still, I feel her most, as though she's just stepped into the next room and will return any second, smiling and wiping her hands on that old apron. Her presence, though no longer physical, is everywhere. In the garden, the kitchen, the lullabies I hum to my children, in the comfort I find in warm sunlight, and the calm that settles over me with the smell of baking bread. In the soft discipline I try to pass on, gentle, patient, rooted in love, her way of loving was subtle, consistent and steady, not extravagant, but always full. I try to carry that with me now. In my own small garden, I grow poppies, not nearly as many as she once did. My patch of earth is modest, but each spring, when they bloom, I feel like she's smiling at me. The petals, delicate and bold, glow just as they did in the garden, catching sunlight and dancing in the breeze. I tend to them carefully, whispering my thoughts as I water them, just like she used to talk to her plants when she thought no one was listening. Those poppies feel like a bridge to her, a living thread between the past and the present, and something I hope my children will grow to cherish too. I've even pressed some of their petals into the pages of her old cookbooks, tucking them between recipes as tiny reminders. Once my daughter found one and asked about it, and I told her the story of the garden, of the laughter, and of the grandmother who taught me everything I know about love, patience, and poppy flowers. Her eyes lit up, wide with wonder, and I saw the beginnings of connection, the passing down of memory. Sometimes on breezy afternoons, I sit quietly near the flower beds and sip tea, letting the hum of bees and rustle of petals wrap around me like an old familiar quilt. I think about the way my grandmother's hands guided mine, the way she made the ordinary feel sacred. I imagine her there with me, kneeling beside the blooms, laughing about how stubborn the weeds are this year. And sometimes when I sit alone with a cup of tea at dusk, the sky painted in dusky purples and quiet golds, I find myself whispering thanks for every poppy she planted, every story she told, every quiet moment she gifted me. Her legacy is not in grand gestures or monuments, but in small things done with great love. The garden she grew may one day be overgrown. The house may eventually pass to other hands, but what she gave me, what remains, is enduring. It lives in the way I care, in the way I cook, in the stories I tell, and the way I listen. It lives in the way I love my children. It lives in every bright poppy that blooms in spring, bold and unashamed, stretching toward the sun. And every time I hear the first few notes of that old familiar song, softly, quietly, like a whisper in the wind, I smile. Because I know she's with me, always. And in that smile, in that song, in that memory, she remains. Thanks for spending this quiet moment with me. If you were reminded of someone you love, I'd be honored to hear your story. Until next time, may memory and sunlight guide you gently.